Morning, everyone, and welcome to week 5 of our 6-week series on a modern analytics framework. Today, we're going to be talking about the insight generation cycle. I'm Jeff Spear. I run the information management practice, and with me this morning is the esteemed Scott Masage, who runs the business intelligence practice. So we're going to talk about Ironside a little bit. Give a summary of the modern analytics framework for people who may have missed earlier broadcasts. And then we'll sort of dig into the insight generation cycle and how to optimize it for your knowledge workers. And then we'll take questions. As always, you can type your questions into the question box, and we will get to them at the end. And if for any reason we don't, we will get back to you after this broadcast. Here at Ironside, we want to help you make better decisions about your business using your data. We've been doing that for a couple decades. We do that in a number of different ways. We have a lot of different capabilities and offerings within our firm, starting with strategic advisory, helping you look at sort of where you are now, where you want to be in the future, and how to get there. Design, whether that's design sprints, UX, solution architecture, data modeling. Building and deploying cloud migrations, data warehouses, dashboards, machine learning models. We do a lot of work on the governance side, and that ranges from master data management to governance operating models, defining processes, doing tool implementations, and then managed services where we can host services for you, administer them, and sort of help you focus on creating your analytics. So if you need help in any of these areas, please reach out to us. So this is week 5. We introduced the modern analytics framework, and then weeks 2 through 4, we're talking about the why, what, and who. Today, we're talking about the how, and that's the methodology for developing new insights. And next week, we're going to have a summary and bring it all back together. So for those of you who have been on all 5 weeks so far, thank you, and hope to see everyone in week 6. This is the summary of the modern analytics framework. It has 3 layers. The top layer, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is the cycle where your knowledge workers are creating value. They have a business question, they have some sort of metric they're looking to understand, and so they go through this process where they take data, they transform that data to generate insight. That insight then creates some amount of value, which they assess, and then they deploy it. And in this framework, the key is that deployment is separated from the people who are generating the insights, and that's down in the bottom layer, automated value delivery, where whatever value is being provided is distributed in a more automated fashion. So whether that's reports or dashboards or a machine learning model, or a more sort of raw data dump, that activity is separated from the insight generation. So instead of having the people who are good at finding new insights stuck refreshing spreadsheets, they are off finding more new insights. And people who are good at automating and making sure that data is populated in a regular way focus on that. And that happens through the middle layer, which is data as a service. So and there you've got a variety of data structures, with data lakes on the left and data warehouses on the right, but then other data zones in between. And so understanding what level of detail, what level of refinement, how much development work needs to go into automating a particular deployment is an important part of this framework. So rather than having everything in the warehouse, which is very easy to access but takes a lot of work to maintain, you want to balance sort of ease of access and maintenance based on how much value this is giving, how well known is that value, how wide is the audience, and that's really what sort of optimizes the value that you're delivering. So if we drill into that insight generation cycle, these are the steps that a knowledge worker takes when they're generating an insight. And these steps, everyone's going to take them. This is the process of turning data into value. And the idea is to understand these, and then we're going to talk in future slides about challenges that each of these face and ways to solve those challenges. So the first step is identify. If I'm given a question or a problem, I'm going to go out and find the data that's relevant to that problem. Then I need to understand that data. Does it actually do what I need? Do I know what it's telling me? Is it actually useful? And then once I have a sense of it, I'm going to transform it. I'm going to combine different data sources. I'm going to create calculations. Maybe I'm going to aggregate data. And this is obviously, sort of the where a lot of the work takes place. Taking sort of raw data and turning it into something that is of value. Once I've done that, I'm going to take a look at it. I'm going to analyze it. I'm going to see what is it telling me. Is there a message in there? Is there something in here that can be useful? And assuming that there is, I will then deploy it. So I'm going to design something and get it to the right audience so that they can make decisions or change their behavior or do whatever it is that provides value. And the important thing to note about this process is that it is iterative. At any point during this process, you may have to go back to an earlier step. You may be in the transform step and you realize, oh wait, I'm missing a data source. You have to go back to identify and find that data source and bring it in. You may deploy something and then realize that there's a problem and have to go back to transform to fix it. So this is a process where to generate a particular insight, you may go back and forth and sort of jump across these steps multiple times before you get what you need. And that's one of the reasons that optimizing it is so important, because the faster you can do that, the faster you're going to generate new insights. So now we're going to talk about the individual steps, some challenges, and some solutions to those challenges. So the first step is identify. What data can help answer this question? And some of the key challenges that we see that are often not addressed are on the left. So, awareness is a big one. Just because data is out there doesn't mean that, the people solving the problems are aware of that data. And this can be in sort of a couple different ways. They may literally just not know the data exists, or they may know it's there but can't find it. And we see this a lot with data lakes, where you dump in all the company's data into one place, and then all of a sudden you have a needle in a haystack situation where the thing I want may be there, but I don't know where it is. I don't know which of the 1,000 tables it's in, or I just don't have the time to sift through everything to find what I'm looking for. And then there's also, and that's selectivity, right? How do I sift through the noise? And then we have the question of, can I actually use the data that I know of? Accessibility, and this can be, do I have security access to it? Do I have the right tool to connect to it? Is it in a format that I'm able to use? So, for some users, the data may be in a semi-structured format like JSON, and they're more used to dealing with, tabular data like Excel or database tables. And so they don't know how to dig into the JSON to pull out the information, so they can't use it. And then data quality. The data may be there, but does it have errors? Does it have blanks? Are there other issues with it that make it not usable? So there are a variety of solutions, and these solutions, each address some or all of these challenges. Obviously, having a data lake so that all the data is available is the first thing, because if the data is not available, then there's no chance that it's going to be used to generate insight. But then what you want to do, this is where the concept of these intermediate data zones becomes relevant, because that creates a situation where users who don't want to dig through all the data have a smaller subset of data to look at. So, a business user probably wants to see sort of a more refined view of things. Instead of seeing 10 order tables, they want to see one table with all the orders put together. That way they know where to look, the data is probably in a better state, and they're more likely to use it. Whereas the data scientist might say, nope, I want the data lake, I want to sift through the 10 order tables and see the raw data and find exactly, the differences, the distinctions, because those are relevant to me. In both cases, though, some sort of catalog is super important, because that's going to help you find what you're looking for, both within a given area, so within the data lake, or knowing across different zones what's there. So I can say, okay, I'm looking for ordered. All right, well, here's 10 raw tables. Here's one refined table. Let me look and say, okay, I want the refined one. That's useful to me. So especially as data moves across these zones, being able to understand what exists in each zone is super important. And that makes data stewards important, because managing that and prioritizing it sort of as data moves from the different zones is what keeps the catalog current and valuable. So last week we talked about lean governance, where you're applying your governance, and as data moves between zones, you're applying more governance to it because that data is becoming more valuable. And then there are triggers sort of based on access and requests for access that say, hey, lots of people are looking at this order data, maybe we need to refine it and bring it into a new data zone. So, and data stewards are the people who manage that process. And similarly, you need a data ingestion process, which we talked about in week 2, where you create a catalog and you create the data lake and data zones and everything's great, but you're going to have new data sources over time. And if you don't have a process for bringing them in, then your data lake is going to be stale and is going to be harder to use. So once someone has found the data they're looking for, they need to understand it. And so that means they have to know what the data means. So, what are the definitions? In particular, often you'll bring in data and there will be, like status codes or fields that mean something in the database, but don't necessarily mean something to other people. So, what are the definitions of those fields? And it can be more subtle. It can be things like, here is a number and it's called order total, but it includes tax, or it doesn't include tax, or it includes, VAT, but not sales tax. And that gets into context. So what are the assumptions behind this data? There may be data where certain areas are missing and it looks like the table is complete, but for whatever reason, that's not the case. So understanding the context is important. Data quality continues to be important, as does structure. So, is the data formatted in a way that is helpful to me understanding it and making use of it? Obviously, I can do work to make it formatted in a better manner, but if I don't have to do that work, then I'm one step ahead. So having a data dictionary, which is often related to a data catalog that defines the fields and terms being used, obviously helps with a lot of this, but also just having contact with subject matter experts, SMEs, because there's always context, there's always detail that isn't in the dictionary, is hard to put in the dictionary. Just sort of, there's no substitute for practical knowledge. So having a community where you can talk to people who know the data, you can talk to people who have used the data and say, yeah, okay, this data is, this is the good data, or, oh, wait, no, you're using that order data. You want to also bring in this table because, those two together give you a complete view. And also having data zones, because this will help have data in the right context with the right quality and structure for different user bases. So understanding, you have a large business analyst knowledge worker population, that means you're probably going to want to have a data zone with data in a much more refined state, maybe even, like denormalized tables for each possible area of reporting, so that they can go look at it and easily see, okay, yeah, I'm doing order data, so here's a table with order and customer and product, and, for 90% of my reports, everything I need is right there. Again, whereas a data scientist might say, no, I want the raw data because I need to look, for more detailed trends, and I may be looking for things that got aggregated away in that single table.
And just to add on to that, I mean, certainly many of the BI tools that are in the marketplace today provide a level of functionality to bring those definitions forward to the user community. In the metadata modeling aspects of them, or through integrations with things like data catalogs. Yeah,
that's very true. So that's a case where tool selection can make a difference to enabling this kind of work. And that's, we talked about last week, governance has a number of different aspects: people, process, tools, structure. Tools are not the only thing, but sometimes they're very important. So now we get into transform, and this is where, you're taking the data and doing something with it to make it useful. There's usually a lot of work here, although if you've prepared your data zones, there's hopefully less. But this is where, things get integrated, calculations get made, other types of transformations, and that can be done in a number of different ways. Often it ends up being done in a tool like Excel, because everyone has Excel. Most people know how to use Excel. And even when it's not the best tool for the job, it is a tool that you have available. And so especially if someone is, maybe not able to use other tools or not aware of those other tools, they're gonna build it that way. And that creates challenges, especially around complexity, because often when you're using, a tool that doesn't sort of save your work as well and sort of requires more convoluted approaches, you're going to sort of start to do some work and you're going to iterate, you're going to realize you made a mistake, and you're going to iterate some more, and you're going to create your result, and then you have to say, okay, how did I do that? And sometimes that's hard to do. So you create something that is harder to build and harder to maintain. That is often a challenge at this stage. You get to the answer you want, but then it's like, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to have to do that repeatedly every time someone wants this answer. That is a challenge. Also, while you're doing work in this stage, you want to understand you may be creating something that's already there. You may be creating a business calculation that someone has already done. You may be creating a business calculation and someone else has already done it, but they defined it differently. We had a client, an insurance client, where there was reporting and metrics being done on auto policies, and different areas of the business treated auto policies differently in terms of whether or not that included motorcycles. So someone might say, here is our sort of average policy metric for the year, and it would be different because for one group it's with motorcycles and one group it's without. And so, and then you sort of, two different groups provide reports and the reports don't match, and it takes a lot of work to understand why. So, making sure that when you're working with something, you're defining it in the same way as other people, or understanding why the definition is different. So tools definitely make a big difference here. And so data wrangling tools that let you manipulate data are super important, as are sandboxes and the ability to have elastic compute. I'm going to talk about these sort of all together. Obviously, with any tools, you want the tool to match knowledge worker. So what I'm talking about largely here are sort of people in the data engineer to business analyst stage. Data scientists are probably going to have their own tools and coding languages and all sorts of things. But there's a large population of people for whom data wrangling tools, which are designed to sort of simplify the process of doing sort of basic SQL type data manipulation, are very, very helpful. And in order for them to be particularly helpful, you need a place to put the results. So I'm creating this new data structure. I need a place to put it. This is one of the big reasons people still use Excel, is that I say, oh, well, I want to create a new table in this database, and IT says, no, you don't have rights to do that. So what you want to do is give people a sandbox where they do have the rights to do that. They can create what they want. It's it's a sandbox. It's temporary. It's not intended to be a sort of a permanent data structure, but it lets them do this work and find the insights they're looking for. Elastic compute, having it in the cloud, often helps with this, because it means that you're not paying for it if you're not using it. If you pay for the compute that you use, that means that when the sandbox is not doing anything, you may pay a little bit for storage, and that's it. And when you need more power, it's there, and you just fire it up. So that's the tool side of it. And then having the catalog so you can understand what other people are doing, and having the communication and coordination that comes with governance, so that people who are doing work in similar areas are aware of each other's work, are aware of the problems they're facing, and so things like divergent definitions come up before the reports are published, or as this work is being done, as opposed to after the fact. Or in the worst case where it happens after the fact, there's a mechanism for going back and saying, hey, we both defined auto policies differently. Let's come up with a single way, or let's decide there's two different terms, because the distinction between motorcycles and not is important. And then analyze. So the knowledge worker needs to look at the data and see what it's telling them. And this is different from delivering the final report. So they need to understand the business context. They need to be able to look at the data and sort of visualize whatever trends or answers or insights they're looking for. They need to know when they need to iterate and go try again. And while they're doing all this, they have to be able to repeat it. So they have to be able to create a process to get to this point that can be easily redone. And that's something that while you're in the thick of it, is hard to remember. At the end, you're like, oh yeah, right, I got to figure out what I did, and that can take a lot of work. So this is really where having a diversity of audience, helping people understand how to map data to questions. There's often, like, I have a question, here's the data, how do I manipulate this data in a way that answers that question? That is a skill that can be taught. And so helping users understand that is, again, especially sort of the right side of the knowledge worker spectrum, can help a lot with this. And then obviously having the right analytics. So having tools that can help me see these answers and make things iterate faster is super important. So now at this point, I've visualized the data, I've got what I want. So now I need to get it out to my audience. And so the biggest challenge here is, how do I communicate the message? So I see a trend, but I need to publish this in a way that helps other people see that same trend. And especially for people who are immersed in data all the time, changing their mindset to think about, well, how do I convey this to someone who did not dive into this data and do all this transformation, can be a difficult task. Making sure the message gets to the right people, making sure that delivering that message is something that I can sustain. The biggest problem we see with Excel-based analytics is now you have people stuck in a manual refresh cycle. Often you will see people spending hours or even days every week or month refreshing spreadsheets because they drive critical reports. Ideally, you don't have the people doing that. Well, people shouldn't be doing that. Those people should be off generating new insights. And then lastly is, how do I measure this? How do I make sure it stays relevant? I produced a great report, but 6 months from now, a business process changes or a new data set comes in, and the value of that report goes down because it's no longer as accurate, or it's not including all the data. So making sure that that the value continues to be delivered over time. So governance is very important here. The automation that gets done needs to be prioritized based on the value of the report. In the ideal world, obviously there'd be bandwidth to automate everything in the appropriate manner. But the reality is that IT and people doing automation, have a lot of tasks in their queue. And so, understanding that, hey, we're going to do this report first and this automation second, is a governance process. Having that different team, having a team that does ETL or ELT that can focus on the automation is critical. That lets the insight generators go back to generating insights, and has a team just focus on, hey, yeah, we're going to make sure this is delivered in an appropriately automated manner. Having more tactical governance, so sort of tighter focus groups that look at particular subject areas and say, okay, hey, we're looking at our existing reports. These are reports that haven't been used much. This one's not being used much because it's no longer relevant. This one's not being used much because it's out of date. What do we need to do to bring it up to date? And then again, having different data zones so that multiple audiences of knowledge workers have the right data. So when I automate something, it no longer means put it in the warehouse. It means find the right zone to put that data in so that that audience can use it.
I definitely think that there's a role for the steward to play in the tactical governance, right? So folks who understand, people within your organization who understand what the data represents and what the report represents, have the ability to understand when something has, if the business has moved in a different direction and that report is no longer relevant, they can take that action, right? And there should be as Jeff said, a periodic review, right? Because the more content you accumulate, the likelihood that content of lesser value begins to appear, right, and collect, and that makes everything more costly and more labor intensive to move on to the next thing or just keep straight.
Yeah, and this is one of the nice things about the modern analytics framework. That kind of accumulation happens everywhere. And one of the things we talked about a couple weeks ago is this framework reduces development work. It does mean there's more management work because there's data in different places and different data zones. But that management work, that governance, also applies to problems like this, which are going to happen no matter what. So you end up with sort of a multiplied benefit because you've got people focused on this stuff, and the end result is a much tighter, cleaner environment. So to summarize, you want to be aware of the 5 steps of the insight generation process, and understand how insight generation works so you can optimize it. It's important to sort of look for bottlenecks at each step of the process. Be aware of what challenges can arise and get a sense of where they're arising and for whom. You want to incorporate solutions into your targeted governance program, and you want to apply lean governance. The challenges, the solutions, how much attention you pay is going to vary, or should vary, based on who's using the data, what audiences you have, so that you can govern more efficiently, and that makes your entire framework more efficient. And with that, we will take questions.
Thank you, Jeff. We do have a couple questions that have come in. One had to do with the data catalog. You've mentioned data catalog a lot. Is this required?
I would say in a modern analytics framework, some sort of data catalog is a necessity. If you have a small amount of data, or if you have a tight group of knowledge workers who know the data well, that may not be the case. But most of the time, it's required. That doesn't mean that you need a big data catalog tool. There are many ways to create and maintain data catalogs, and it may be that something that's sort of more manual, like a wiki, or using just sort of a document-based approach may be sufficient. But I would say, yeah, if you're creating a modern analytics framework, if you have a data lake, if you have a data warehouse, you want to have a list of what's out there that gets maintained on a regular basis. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to extend that a bit, I mean, if you think about organizations, right, change is permanent, right? So there's always new folks coming on, and they're not going to have the institutional knowledge that others have built up year after year. And if you're relying on that institutional knowledge and you have turnover, then it can be, you can impact your business continuity.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. Another one is, you mentioned reporting. How can we improve our reporting and the user interface for it?
Okay, that's a good question. I can certainly take that one. So, the goal of good UI, or if you will, the UX, right, is actually in the name itself, right? A good user experience. We should be designing our reports in a way that allows users to make business decisions using the report with as little training as possible, right? That should be the goal. Some common themes here. Simple is best, right? A cluttered interface increases complexity and reduces the usability of a report or a dashboard. The same is true for visualizations, right? So with today's tools, you can create some really sophisticated and stunning visualizations, but that doesn't necessarily translate into usable visualizations or usable reports. So it's, again, keep it simple, and again, extravagance here isn't, it may be nice to look at, but it isn't helpful in terms of usability. Another theme, location, right? Use your screen real estate wisely. It's just, certainly what's typical is those metrics of highest priority or predicted usage should be generally placed towards the top left-hand side of the screen. And lastly, it's important to measure, right? How do you know how you're doing in your efforts to improve the UI, right? The best way to do that from our perspective is to run usability tests within your community. It's true that a change you make while you are designing or developing is a lot less costly than a change after the report has been deployed to prod, right? So again, iteration and testing is key while you develop.
Thanks, and I think we have time for one last question. What's the best way to track data quality?
So what we promote is using your analytic tools to track data quality. So, and this requires a governance process to say, okay, we're discovering these data quality issues. We're creating, particular rules to correct or at least identify those problems, and then, put those rules into some sort of automated structure so that, every day we're going to run on this data set and we're going to, call out every place where there's a data quality issue. Here are the number of rows where this field was blank. Here are the number of rows where the date was, before 1800, which is almost certainly not a valid value. And then track that data and report on it over time. I had a place where they had 100,000 data quality issues, and then we published a dashboard that showed the 90-day trend of data quality issues. In 30 days, it went from 100,000 to 10,000 because everyone saw it and saw that they could make the number go down. So visualizing your data quality is the best way to reduce the number of issues and keep it down.
Jeff, can I just sneak in one more question?
Sure.
It seems like there are many separate data sources that are all being brought together. what does the end state look like? Is it a single pane of glass, or do you still see many moving parts?
So I guess, I mean, what gets seen depends on the audience for the report. I mean, or the insight. I think, you know, if we're thinking about a dashboard or some sort of other visualization, you're going to see one thing, right? And the goal is to say, I'm going to, you know, bring all this different stuff together. There may be things that it's a little more raw. There may be, you know, we're bringing things into a data zone and we're surfacing it to data scientists, and things, there may be more moving parts. So I guess what I would say is there's a lot of moving parts behind the scenes, and those moving parts get exposed to the governance groups and the knowledge workers and the people who are creating insights. But the goal is to create something more unified for the people who are taking those insights and using them to drive actions.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so next week, we're going to wrap this up. Tim Krajtek will be on with me, I believe, and we'll be bringing this series to a close. We've also got some other topics coming up on Thursdays at 10 a.m. This week, we're doing best practices in moving analytics to the cloud, presented by a couple people from my team. And we've got some other things coming up through September, so we hope to see you on those. Sorry for going a few minutes over, and thanks everyone. And unless you have something, Debbie, I think we're all set, and everyone have a good day.
Great. Have a great week.